What's going on, YouTube fam? It's your boy Wisco Madman coming at you with day 4 of the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. As I've said in previous videos, I am reading from notes, so bear with me. But I've got quite a bit of notes here, and I can say that day 4 starts out with Jason Lakowski's testimony. One of the gentlemen that was brought into the, I guess, militia, for lack of a better term, protecting the businesses. He was brought into said militia by Ryan Balch, as he knew Ryan Balch prior to this. He is also a military vet, and he also mentioned right off the get-go something that was noteworthy to me, that there were people within the protest crowd that were strictly there to cause problems. Strictly there to incite riots is kind of the idea that I was getting from this. And they were violent to police and other protesters around them. And even the protesters, the people that were there to protest Jacob Blake's shooting, they weren't comfortable with these people around. It was very clear that they didn't fit in as much as they wanted to try to seem like they were part of the protests. Binger then seems to condescend to Jason as he asked Jason whether he was telling the truth to the police, or to if he told the truth to the police or to the media that was there, the reporters that were there that were asking questions. And Binger was referring to instances where I guess he had told the press that he didn't know Kyle Rittenhouse or anything like that. He just basically avoided all interview is kind of the gist that I got from that. But Binger was trying to act like he's some sort of criminal for that, and obviously this case is not to prosecute Jason Lakowski or anybody else that was within the militia. It's simply to prosecute Kyle Rittenhouse. So yeah, just more of the kind of political games, I guess, is what I took from the prosecution's case. Also, another point, I noticed that Prosecutor Binger didn't know what quick clot is. That's pretty basic medical supply. I'm not saying everybody's got it in their particular medical supply. I do. But yeah, dude, if you're a prosecutor and you have knowledge of police and stuff like that, like, come on. Even the police probably have quick clot. Like, seems like a pretty legit thing. I mean, it's a lifesaver when you're talking about open gashes and shit like that. Like, this shit just sears your fucking gas shut. It's awesome. Anyway, so moving on, then the cross comes. The defense gets to question Jason Lakowski, and they bring up, which Binger had previously gotten out of Jason, his way of being present and being a deterrent was a method called shout, shove, show, shoot. So first you shout, you tell them to knock it off, tell them to stop doing what they're doing, whatever. Police use that one too. Shove, you push somebody, you push them away, you try to just, hey, get off the property, leave us alone. Then the next is show, meaning he's got a fucking AR-15 sitting on his goddamn, around his neck, around the holder, I can't think right now, leash that he had on for his gun. But then the last being shoot. And obviously if you're showing, that, in my mind, that means you're very close to shooting. If you're going to brandish, is what that comes off to me as, which, from what I understand, brandishing, at least for a holstered weapon, is considered illegal. But if you're brandishing your weapon, you better be ready to pull that trigger. So, I don't know that I necessarily agree with his methods. Whether or not they would actually be effective, on the other hand, I do think that they would definitely be effective. I just don't know that they're necessarily legal in all cases. Obviously, even at the point of shoving, I mean, you're already getting at the point of committing assault. So, yeah. Then he, upon cross-examination, the defense asked, "Are you trained to flee?" Meaning, like, hey, did the military train you to flee from a fight? And the answer is no. We don't train people. You're outgunned or outmanned or whatever that happens, and you have to regroup, but they don't train you to flee. That's just not, even the police aren't really trained to flee. I mean, there's just regroup and deal with the task at hand. So the next portion, we get to talking about how Joseph Rosenbaum was acting extremely violent the entire night. We previously heard how he had threatened to kill any of these guys if they caught him alone. I might not have mentioned that when we were talking about Ryan Balch and his testimony, but he testified to that he said that if he got any of them guys alone, he would fucking kill them. You know, whether or not he had the weapons or anything like that, that's a very serious threat. He also was at this Black Lives Matter Jacob Blake protest, clearly for African Americans, as a white boy, pure Caucasian male, yelling, "Shoot me, N-word." I won't repeat it, but you know exactly what I'm talking about. And he said this repeated times to these guys, trying to entice them, doing this kind of juke step at people, like getting in their face and stuff, like just extremely violent actions, extremely provocative, trying to provoke these guys to do something about it, you know? It's also mentioned that the protesters around him just weren't comfortable with him being there. He was just very out of place. So we move on to the DNA examiner, Rasmussen. I forgot what her first name was, but the person who did the DNA lab tests, and she tested some barrel guard samples from Kyle's gun. Obviously had Kyle's DNA on it. It was inconclusive to anything else, any other DNA. The DNA did not match up to Anthony Hubert, and it did not match up to Joseph Rosenbaum. Not that it couldn't possibly be that way, but the way DNA works is it's kind of a ratio thing, and the likelihood was unlikely. They also had pistol magazines, blah, blah, just extra crap that hasn't really been brought in yet at this point. She just testifies to most of that, kind of entering a lot of this stuff into evidence. They cross her. The biggest thing the defense brings up to the DNA examiner is simply that you didn't test Kyle's barrel. You tested the barrel guard, the hand guard, where, you know, when you're holding it, that's where you would hold, or sometimes some people have a foregrip or whatever. They tested that region where the possessor would hold on to it, but they didn't test any portion past that for potential somebody of grabbing the barrel or whatever. And the question was addressed to the examiner. The examiner said, no, we did not, because at the time they did not know that was a reasonable process. You know, it just wasn't thought of that was a potential necessity. Then he kind of brings up which I don't know if it's relevant as to the examiner's testimony to this, but he did show the picture in court proving that Anthony Huber grabbed Kyle's gun while he was, coming at him. So, I mean, you can see, like, full grasp on the gun. That's part of the picture. Pretty sure you can look that picture up, and it's fairly widely spread on the internet right now. We move on to Anthony Huber's great aunt, and I didn't even note her name, but it's his great aunt. And the reason she's relevant is as a character witness. She testifies to knowing Anthony very well. They had a very good relationship, a very frequent relationship. She was around him ever since he was a child. She was in his life quite frequently. And she testifies that Anthony Huber, amongst this, it's brought up, I believe this is by the cross-examination. So from the defense, it was brought up that he threatened his brother with a chef's knife, saying in trying to get his brother to do the cleaning work that had to be done around the house, that he would gut him like a pig. To move on from this, by the way, this was a court case. It wasn't just in passing. This is part of his court documented history. He put a knife to his brother's stomach, then grabbed him by the neck, nails digging in, and put the knife to his brother's ear. And the brother was actually reported saying that at the time he wasn't sure. He actually thought his ear was cut. Then Anthony stormed out of the house saying, "I'm going to burn the house down with you fuckers in it." The case was then, I think he pled out for strangulation and suffocation. I think that's what the end of that was. But that was, basically, that was the charges. So there was also another case with his sister in which he kicked her in the hip hard enough that she needed medical attention. So, yeah. Guys, a head case. So now we move on to, since that character witness is over, we move on to Carrie Ann Schwartz. If you haven't heard, she is Joseph Rosenbaum's fiance. Was Joseph Rosenbaum's fiance. And just some notes that I thought were relevant that she brought up is her and Joseph were homeless at the time of their meeting. I believe at the time of this demonstration, protest, riot, whatever have you, the night that he was murdered, they were currently living in a hotel room, motel room, whatever it was. And she also gets into previously unadmissible information. They didn't talk about this in front of the jury prior, but it has already been spoken on court TV that Joseph Rosenbaum just got out of the hospital. That hospital being the mental ward. She speaks to Joseph taking benzodiazepines, and specifically names one medication that he was taking for bipolar disorder, which when I looked up, it didn't quite match up. But she claims that he was taking gabapentin, I believe is what it's called, for bipolar disorder, which bipolar disorder is a realm of depression. I can speak to that. I know what depression's all about, the bipolar depression's all about, because I've dated people with it. And that's some pretty severe shit. There's depression and then there's bipolar, and bipolar means that, literally. That's how fast your mood goes from you could be having the greatest day ever to absolute just insane. Manic depressive is another term that comes to mind. She was his medical contact, his emergency medical contact, and that's why she's fully aware of most of his medical situation. So she's fairly capable of testifying to his medical situation. So it's fair to say that Joseph Rosenbaum was not in a fair state of mind. He freshly came out of a mental hospital, and I'm sure things were quite heightened for him at the time of his murder. We move into Sahil Kabri and Anmol Kabri, also known as Sam. I didn't take much notes for this. Most of it was a very dodgy testimony from both individuals. They're brothers. Their father owns the car sources, and they help run it for him. One said that he ran the inventory. I'm not 100% sure what the other did. But more or less, it's just a very dodgy testimony from both of them. They were avoiding questioning, avoiding straight answers, very confusing, almost seemed like they were purposely trying to throw off not only the prosecution, but the cross-examination from the defense. That was my take on it. So for the most part, other than some documentation, and basically they both said that no, we never invited a militia to protect our properties. We never did this, we never did that. Never. No, we were unaware. And then there were parts where they got basically called out because they would say something, and it's like, well, didn't you say you didn't know anything about this? How were you here at this time? And blah, blah, just random shit. So, like I said, most of it was irrelevant other than showing that they're clearly not telling the truth. And I attribute most of that to being that they were trying to avoid either insurance scandals, saying something on the stand that insurance may hold against them, or liability lawsuits that they may incur after this trial from anybody who was shot or injured or maimed or any of sort of thing because of this militia and them being liable for them. So understand why they were dodgy, but yeah, basically a worthless testimony in my mind. We move on to Officer Eric Weiner, however he said his name. He's a Kenosha patrol officer. Speaks to basically being like a patrol CSI. So not only is he the officer, but he's also one of the people that comes to do the crime scene investigation stuff, start taking photos and collecting evidence and whatnot. As to it being a significant amount of time since the occurrence of said incident to when they collected the evidence, that's not 100% true. He testifies that it was probably within an hour or two that they were closed off, no entry to the area, and were able to gather evidence. Additional information that was brought up that was actually quite interesting in this case was the fact that 3 .40 caliber shell casings were found in the street near 63rd and Sheridan. So if we're thinking about Sheridan, there were, I believe, 2 found on Sheridan right next to the car source lot where Joseph Rosenbaum was shot. And then there was one more on, sounded like it was on 63rd. So the point being is the gunfire that we were talking about from behind Kyle when he was running from Joseph. So now we think we have Kyle in front, Joseph behind, reporter guy, Richie McGinnis, behind them, and that gunshot that I originally stated from the testimony sounded like it was from behind. The 40 cal casings were over to this way, so instead of being directly behind, it was probably like 20 feet off to the side. So it was behind Kyle, but more off to the side is kind of the picture that I'm getting, so diagonally behind him. Probably just on the other side of the car, right in the street. There was a car that they passed when he was running before he turned around and shot Joseph. So just to kind of paint a little extra picture to you of how it's coming together in my head. Then we move on to the testimony of Officer Jeff Van Wynn, however. He was one of the officers that tested the firearms for forensic evidence, so gathering the samples that went to the DNA examiner, if I understand this correctly. It's a very complex process that I am definitely not educated on how it works within crime scene investigation and within the police office, as far as how they do things. So what I have taken note from what he said is he tested the firearms for forensic evidence, and he didn't know the details of the case, so he only tested possession areas, meaning trigger area, barrel handguard by possession areas. That's not verbatim what he said. That's I noted, because that's saying who was holding the weapon, thinking who was possessing the weapon. They weren't really looking for who grabbed the barrel or something like that, because they were unaware of that. The communication wasn't quite there at the time to test for that. At some point upon cross-examination, I think, or redirect, the prosecution just simply brought up, did the defense ever ask for a retest? Response, no. Obviously, the defense did not. But nonetheless, the evidence wasn't there, so that would have been an additional piece just to confirm what had happened. The final officer that was on the stand on day 4 here, wrapping this up, was Officer Pep Morta, is what it sounds, however you say that. So his partner was Officer Krieger. These are the 2 officers that were in the patrol vehicle that Kyle tried to surrender to, or claims he tried to surrender to. Officer Morta was in the driver's seat. So in the video, if you're watching the video, Officer Morta is in the driver's seat. Officer Krieger is in the passenger seat. As he approaches, according to the officer, he was defying commands to get out of the way of the vehicle because they were trying to proceed down. They didn't know he was trying to surrender, according to this testimony. His hands may have been up, but as far as knowing that he was the killer at the time, he was the shooter, they had no idea. They didn't know he was trying to surrender. And ultimately, when Kyle disobeyed orders and started kind of coming up on the passenger side, the officer testified to having drawn his weapon while driving with the other hand, which I'm lefty, he was probably righty. It's more common. But either way, he drew his weapon. He claims that he probably would have pointed it in the direction of Kyle in a potential to have to protect himself, because they're unaware of what's going on at the moment, just an armed individual coming up to the vehicle. His passenger, his partner, Officer Krieger, then amongst, by the way, they're ordering him to get back, to get out of the way of the vehicle, and Krieger disperses pepper spray on Kyle. Whether or not it hit the target, Kyle backs up. At that point, you see this confirmed by video footage. And basically, direct to my notes, now that I've given you kind of my memory of the thing, go direct to the notes. It says Kyle approached the car. They didn't know who he was. His hands were up. They did mention that. There were more people out armed that night than unarmed, was a mention by Officer Morta. He basically described this area as an absolute all-out war zone. The officer said that Kenosha was basically a war zone that night. So this is a confirmed, painted picture by the officers. Absolute war zone. That's a key piece of evidence right there. A key piece of painting the night, the picture of the night, to understand what everybody was going through that night. The officer also, upon cross, confirms he did not instruct Kyle to get on the ground, put his hands behind his back, any of that kind of crap. He did not tell him, amongst any of this, orders to surrender. So Kyle didn't disobey those. He just disobeyed, when they're, sir, get out of the way of however they said it, they were yelling at him over an intercom to get out of the way of the vehicle because they were trying to proceed down the road to see where this active shooter was. Little did they know the active shooter was right in front of them. So, follow me for day 5 through, I think there's 10, actually. I just noticed there was a day 10 up there. So, this has been your boy, Wisco Madman. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Let me know what y'all think. Ask questions. If there's other information you may have heard that you're wondering if I heard it in the direct tapes, feel free to ask, man. I will let you know anything that I've heard that, if I can confirm it. So I'll catch y'all in the next one. Peace.